digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we are joined by the lovely Amy McManus from AM Marketing, and we also have with us Liam Dowell from, I'm going to say Rift VGX. Have I got the letters the wrong way round?
Rift VGTR.
VGTR. I knew it was V something. Why don't you explain for us exactly who you are and what you do and what exactly your company is all about? Why don't you start for us, Liam? And now that you've given me the correct initials, you can tell me what they stand for.
So yeah, Rift VGTR stands for Video Games Tax Relief. We're there to help developers unlock a piece of government legislation to get some tax back from the government for your game development.
Wonderful, thank you. And Amy, why don't you tell us a little bit more about AM Marketing and the broad spectrum of everything that you cover?
Oh, cool, yeah. Within 10 minutes, yeah. So I'm from AM Marketing. We're a specialist digital marketing agency, and we have a real niche for the gaming industry, technology and entertainment. So whether you're a startup or whether you're a founded business or a studio, we kind of help guide you with your marketing and your business and basically make sure that you push yourself forward in the right direction.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. And what I wanted to do today was really talk about funding and finance for the games industry and for the VR industry as well, because they kind of sit very much hand in hand. And here's the thing is I know that for a lot of new startup studios, there is this big question about where the heck do I get the money from? And so they go on this long journey, the whole, fundraising and talking to VCs and, equity funding is a thing that they all think that they have to do. And what I would really like you to do, Liam, is just explain in brief exactly what the tax credit is all about, because there's a lot of money that's available for studios that they're not necessarily aware of. And that comes in the form of grants and government funding, but also, as you rightly point out, things like the tax relief as well.
That's exactly it, yeah. So the tax relief really it's an opening to try and make the UK once again a powerhouse in development for video games. We had a great kind of community back in, I would say, around about the 80s, where the old school kind of bedroom coders were around. Once those guys became adults and realised they can actually make a living out of this, we lost those to obviously the bigger places such as Asia and Canada and America. And now the government have realised that the video game industry is massive now. This tax was made to try and get those back into the UK. So, like I say, make the UK a developing powerhouse.
Okay, so explain how it works for them? So, because some people are going to think, tax credits, that means free money, but it doesn't. Mm-hmm. There's a very specific way this works. Why don't you explain very briefly exactly how it works?
So very briefly, you have to be spending the money first on development, and it has to be for the areas that are within your development costs. Once you have paid the money, there's two sections. There's an interim claim that you can make, which is halfway through or around about the beginning once you've spent some money, and put that through your limited company's books. And there's also then the final certification, where you will then actually gain the final amount of money that you've spent. Initially, it's around about 80% of your development costs you can claim for, and you then get back 20% of that 80% of your development.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that brief explanation. Now that we've kind of understood one of the options for being able to raise additional funding or at least reclaim some of the funding back, I kind of want to throw the ball in your court, Amy, and talk about some of the kind of, I'm not going to say mistakes, I'm going to say learning experiences that young studios and kind of emerging studios often tend to face. And that does tend to be with things like budgeting and forecasting. I, for one, know that when I walk into many studios and start the conversation for a consultancy or whatever it may be, and one of my first questions always is, can I see your forecast? And oftentimes that's the first stumbling block, is when somebody looks at you very blankly and kind of goes, forecast? And you kind of then immediately have to explain to them exactly how P&Ls work and why you would need to have a forecast, and also how the forecast would then inform things like your marketing budget or your media spends. And it is a bit of a challenge for some of these new and emerging studios. And I'm curious, from your experience dealing with the games industry, what you kind of see to be the trend.
I think it's that the gaming industry is actually very similar to a lot of other industries. You get, as you say, a lot of people budget poorly. They don't have a business plan. Well, one of the main things we find is that a lot of people, if they do have a business plan, it's kind of sitting up on a shelf and it's almost like, oh, I've done it and it's there. But rather than treating your business plan as a working document, referring back to it, and if things change your business plan along with it. We also see a lot of people that go out and spend a huge amount of money on marketing before they even really know what they're doing, before, as you say, made a forecast, before they've got an idea of sales. They'll go and maybe spend, like, in some cases we've seen maybe 10 grand on a website before they even really know what they do as a company. And then, get a year down the line, even 6 months down the line, it's all got to be changed because they've changed what they do. We also see a lot of people wanting to be a perfectionist. So they want to, like, make this sort of, like, perfect game and send it out, rather than, what we would suggest, maybe build an MVP, so a minimum viable product, get that out the door, and then think about getting feedback on that, and then improving it and moving on to the next one, rather than spending and investing loads and loads of time and effort on making one thing and pushing that out. It's, as you say, it's all about a lot of the mistakes that we see. They are ones that are very, very common across loads and loads of different industries. But yes, unfortunately, you get a lot of people that know the gaming industry very well. They know what they do very well. They're great designers and great developers and fantastic, but they either feel that they need to do all their accountancy themselves, all their marketing themselves, rather than bring in someone else for advice. And often I like to use the phrase, if you think it's expensive to hire a professional, wait until you hire an amateur.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of people that have maybe they can come to us after they've made the mistakes and the money sort of go down the drain, rather than hire the professional at the beginning, get that person, get their knowledge, even if it's just you're paying for a couple of hours of consultancy to just point you in the right direction and to give you a better flavour of where to spend your money and how to move forward.
I find this interesting in terms of the VR industry, because we're seeing a lot of those types of behaviours emerge, where we have people who they're spending an awful lot of money on marketing a VR experience, but they haven't actually got any monetization on that experience. So they haven't thought about, how do I make my money back now that I've spent the money on making this thing? And in fact, they're relying very heavily on either equity share investments, so where a VC or an angel investor is coming in and putting money in exchange for equity, or they're relying on grants and government funding, whether that is things like the tax credit or other kind of areas of money, where they're just hoping that they're going to get their money back in other ways. But we're seeing a lot of people who are striking out and not really thinking about the commercialization and the monetization of their products at this early stage in the VR industry. And it's quite interesting, because there's a lot of people who would justify that by saying, well, it's still very nascent and nobody's really figured it out yet, so it's okay to be in the show and tell mode and just show off and just create things for the sake of creating them. I'm curious, Liam, from your perspective, whether or not you think that there is kind of a danger of too many people kind of just throwing something out in the world and not really thinking about how they're making money back on that. Is this down to that lack of financial education, or do you think this is just a kind of a hope and pray scenario for people who are just stepping into the industry?
I have to agree with that. I believe in a way that it's because they love what they do. They love what they do so much that they forget that it is actually a business sometimes, and they don't want to think of it that way. So they don't really want to plough the money into professionals, like Amy said. They just want to kind of really hope that it's going to work because they've put so much love and time into it. They really do need to be seeking out those professionals to actually help them take their business to the next level. As much as they don't want to, because they still want to make it a passion, if you're serious about it, you really do need to look into doing that.
It's interesting you should say this. I do recall speaking at an event where I was talking about forecasting, and one of the audience members, it was a games industry event, kind of raised their hand for a question, and their question was, why do we have to make it financially viable? Why does it have to be something that makes money? And I was kind of like, okay, I think we've missed the point of why we're here. But that is kind of the attitude of, as you say, these kind of very passionate people who really love what they do, which is great. But it is much more beneficial when we're paid for doing what we love to do, rather than it being, as some would call it, a hobby gone out of control. So I am curious, though, from your perspective, Liam, whether or not we are seeing enough in the way of education and training happening within both the VR industry and the games industry, for that matter, when it comes to these new studios and they're hitting the ground with these lovely demos and these lovely games that they're throwing out, or the experiences they're throwing out. But there isn't necessarily a huge amount of education going on in terms of, sitting them down and saying, look, here's the financial education you need in order to have a long-term, successful, viable business.
Yeah, I completely agree. There is not enough information. There's not enough education out there for people, because this, in a lot of people's eyes, especially business people, this is still a very new industry to them, and it kind of scares them a little bit. It worries them because this is the next big thing, and no one's really kind of grabbed onto that from a business point at the moment. And there just does need to be more education out there for people. The likes of, obviously, the BFI are doing a great job at the moment. They're actually at EGX this weekend, or they were yesterday, speaking about how to do their certifications and explaining to them that it is actually quite a simple process. It's not something you need to worry about too much. So there are some education out there for people. There's just not enough, though.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, since we're talking about the BFI and certification, that it's worth noting that BFI certification isn't just for games and films. It does actually apply to VR and immersive entertainment as well. And we're starting to see not just the BFI, but also people like Creative England starting to put support and money and funding into, VR and immersive entertainment experiences as well. So I think it's worth people taking a look at the relevant websites and the relevant web pages to actually understand what certification involves and what it means once you have that certification. Because again, I think this is worth explaining, because a lot of people don't understand what BFI certification actually does for you. And there are certain things that you have to score on, and obviously there are criteria to make sure it's a British product, and the cultural tests and various other things that you're scoring points on. But once you have that certification and that bit of paper, essentially that is something that you can use as, I would say, almost a guarantee in some cases with investors, and certainly with the HMCTS as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's very much, to put it in the best terms possible, it's your golden ticket to claim your video games tax relief. But it's also, like I say, it makes you look much more investment ready.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. So having explained that, I'm curious then to talk about the non-government forms of support that are out there as well, because I do think that there is quite a lot in the way of kind of, I'm going to say CPD or continued professional development training courses rather than formal university courses around this, because I do think there are a lot of people dabbling, people like Rain Dance and Shooting People and Tiga and even Yuki to a certain extent, who are throwing out content courses for people to get their heads around some of this stuff. And I know that there is, formerly Creative Skill Set would have, supported and helped with some of this stuff as well. But again, their courses may have been slightly more creative or technically focused. And I'm curious to hear from both of you what your thoughts are on this in terms of the perception of the industry itself. And when I say the industry itself, I mean people like Tiga and Yuki and BAFTA and the BFI, whose focus isn't necessarily about educating from a commercial and business standpoint, but more about supporting and encouraging either the technical skills or the creative skills. And yet there is this fundamental importance of having a commercial skill and understanding how budgets and finance and marketing work that seems to be lacking with some of these organizations. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I mean, yeah, I think you've completely hit the nail on the head there, that while there are these great things that, support sort of more of the creative side and more of the industry side, there is a fundamental lack of education with regard to just normal processes on setting up a business and how to make it successful. You could have the most amazing game or the best VR product with like incredible developers, but if it doesn't get out to the right people and and the business itself is managed poorly, then it's not going to be successful. And unfortunately, we see quite a lot of that. Where they just haven't had and to be honest, as Liam has already touched on, you get these amazing people that just love what they do so much, and it is essentially a hobby. And the woman that you said, why does it have to be financially viable? They just don't know that this is the stage you have to do. They don't know that they perhaps need an accountant. They don't know that they've got to fill in a tax form 4 times a year now. They don't know that they need marketing and all the different options available to them. So that's where you sort of think, okay, well, maybe I can go to a different area. So I can go to someone like, I don't know, the Institute of Digital Marketing, or you type in something like digital marketing courses and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them come up. But so it would be fantastic to get to a point where there are courses, rather than just generalize this is how you use social media, or generalize this is how you fill up a business plan, that were more specific to the industry and particularly to the VR industry, because it is different and it does require a different angle.
Okay, and Liam, what's your thought on this?
I have to agree 100% with Amy. It goes back really to the education at the start. It has to be at the very start of these guys actually thinking of setting up a company. And in some ways, I don't want to sound horrible. In some ways, it kind of needs a hand-holding approach. Whereas, people who have made the mistakes need to be teaching the people not to make those mistakes in the future.
Okay, so on that basis, given the experience that we have on this particular show, I'm curious then, if you were speaking directly to a new studio, be it a game studio or a VR studio, what would be the one thing that you would tell them that you think would be the most valuable lesson that you could teach them in just one lesson? What would that thing be? And I'll start with you, Liam.
The two main things I would say to them would be, first off, become a limited company. And the second would be, find a good accountant.
Okay.
That'd be the two things I would always say to them.
And Amy, what would be your advice?
For me, it would be similar lines in terms of don't try and be Superman. Do what you do and do it well. But everything else that you don't do well and you don't understand, like finding a fantastic accountant. We're great at marketing, but we get a rift for all of our accounting needs because they're fantastic. But that you find a great accountant, find a great marketing consultant, or say a business advisor that has worked within the gaming industry and has those particular ties and experience, and really get that advice. Because yes, it may be a cost, but it's actually gonna save you so much money in the mistakes that you won't make.
Okay, so biggest mistakes that you've made in your careers to date. I'd be interested to hear, because obviously nobody gets to where they are without having made a few mistakes along the way.
Of course, yeah.
What are the mistakes that you would own to?
I didn't say no to a client that I had a bad feeling about, and I just had a feeling in my gut that it wasn't going to go well and that they were going to be difficult. And lo and behold, they were. And it was far too much effort than it was worth. And yeah, I wish, and that taught me that you can say no. And they have this, you have the brilliant idea that everyone says that you can sack your suppliers, you can sack your marketing agency, but it can be the other way around.
They can fire you. Yes, it's true.
You should be able to say no. You should be able to say no to people and turn down work, and actually say to your clients, we're not working for you anymore if the relationship isn't working from your side, not just their side.
That's a very good, valuable lesson to learn.
Thank you very much.
And Liam, what about you?
So pretty much my experience, before I started within funding and in tax, I ran a limited company for social gaming and esports. So we became a limited company. But very much like the lessons, and I kind of sound like a broken record now, we didn't have an accountant. We didn't know about accountants. We didn't know the lessons, and there wasn't enough information out there. So, and we tried to do, much like Amy said, we tried to do everything ourselves and tried to be Superman. It just didn't work. And that's, like I say, that's the biggest lesson I've learned and taken on board by talking to these guys. Find the right people, find the right professionals to help you out. If not, I'm not going to say you will fail, but you have more chance of failure.
Okay, so we always like to ask a big question on every show. And in the context of this conversation, I'm going to ask you, what do you think is the significant change that needs to happen, be it a cultural change or a technological change, that will completely reinvent the way that people perceive finance for their business? And I am curious what your thoughts are on this, Liam.
So the biggest two is, like we've been saying throughout this whole podcast, it's awareness and education. People need to know that there is access out there to funding. There's access out there to video games tax relief. Our biggest problem at Rift is finding the people or finding the development companies and making them aware that it's there and it's there for the taking. So awareness, completely, 100%.
Okay. Amy, what's your thoughts on this in terms of technological or cultural shift that you think needs to occur?
I wish you'd come to me first, because I was going to say education.
I've stolen your answer.
Liam. But in not just from a financial point of view as well, but in terms of the business and marketing side as well, what you see in terms of what an account, if someone doesn't understand something and it's sort of a black art, then you're sort of losing before you've even started. because there'll always be that, oh, what are they doing? What am I actually spending my money on? So it's educating that person on the options available to them, particularly from a marketing perspective and a business perspective. What options are available to that person? What can be done for them and their business? And I think as well as the industry grows, I think a point that Liam said a while back is that no one has really completely taken over VR yet and really dominated it as a sort of business. So when that starts to happen and people really start to see VR as the next best thing, as the technology gets better, more people are able to access it, I think that will be the sort of big shift, and people will really start to see it as more of a business opportunity.
Okay. I'm dreading the day when somebody decides to do advertising in VR. I'm not sure I want to see that in VR, but we'll see what happens.
See, we have seen it, yeah. We have seen little examples, and it is quite crazy. We've seen examples where advertising sort of sticks out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
But then we've also seen examples where it's in-game. So you may see a billboard in-game while you're walking around the streets, and that is advertising a product. And that for me is that sort of clever stuff that isn't invasive.
Yeah, I don't mind that as much. It's when you're in the middle of playing something and just everything stops while you watch a preloaded video of something, and you're just like, seriously, in VR, really? So I am looking forward to seeing what people figure out when it comes to this stuff. And also how people are going to advertise VR in and of itself, because I think there is still that missing gap in terms of how people articulate and advertise not inside VR itself, but outside of VR, how they're advertising VR to other formats. So I think that's going to be quite an interesting journey that we'll see evolve over the next few months. But in the meantime, as always, we like to give our listeners a way to be able to find out a little bit more about what you're up to and generally follow you. So we ask you to do that by sharing with us your social media handle of choice. What would that be, Amy?
Mine is @marketing_AM, and that's for Instagram and Twitter.
Wonderful. And Liam, what about yourself?
So our Twitter handle is @gamingtax, and the website is www.gamingtaxrelief.co.uk.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review, and follow us on Twitter @DigitalJamLTD. DigitalJamSessions.com